With all the success you've had, do you still face, are you currently facing any fears, or are there fears about the horizon?
Man, I have to give you amazing props. You're such a curious person about the people that you talk to. I love it. I love it, man.
Thank you.
The answer is, thank you. Are you kidding me? I've been on a ton of podcasts and people just same questions.
Welcome to the Idea Climbing Radio Show. Today, we're discussing how to create a sales playbook for your next big idea. And I'm proud to say that my guest is Shane Jamison. Shane is on a mission to redefine what it means to be a sales guy. Most people think a sales guy is a silver-tongued pitchman that could sell water to a well. That's not the case. The reality is that most successful people act as a guide to help the buyer become the hero of their story. It's not about getting the yes. It's about providing clarity so the buyer can make a decision, a yes or a no. His energy is focused on helping businesses and salespeople change their approach so they can build a successful and sustainable business that they're proud of. That's important. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, Shane.
Yes, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm excited to be on the show.
And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about a sales playbook for your next big idea. Before we get into the tips, the tricks, the strategies, I would love to know, what is your story? How did you get so good at sales, particularly with the playbook? It's one thing to just go randomly good at closing sales, but a playbook. How did you get that good at sales? What's your story there?
Yeah, so my sales career is over 20 years plus now. I'm not sure the exact, but I started when I was 19 and in school. I was still in college, started selling cell phones with AT&T and realized like I was making way more money than my friends that are graduating and getting degrees. And so it clicked really quick there that like, I like this. I like making money. I like being successful, and went to President's Club. You know, when you finish in the top certain percentage, you get to go to President's Club. So that initially captured my interest and engaged me. And through the years, after that, my next company was, I feel so fortunate and lucky now, but I got into this company culture of results and really built around coaching. And so we were constantly practicing, we were constantly drilling, we were constantly doing reviews, and I loved it. And I thought that that's how it was going to be everywhere. I quickly left and found out it's pretty much like that nowhere. And for me, it resonated with me because I came from an athletic background, playing in sports growing up. And so that structure and that discipline of preparing, practicing, and that builds the confidence to then go in and have that conversation. And so, going into my next roles and not having that, I quickly realized like I've got to figure something out. Every role is slightly different, but there are elements that are fundamental to any sales process, whether you're selling transactional, like get on the, you do a pitch and they buy, or if it's something that's much more complex and drawn out, like an enterprise sales cycle, there are fundamentals that have to be nailed down. And in order to do that effectively, it requires the preparation, the practice, the drill. And so I had to build that playbook that I could use and be effective going into those next roles. And then as I started to build that and have some success, sharing that with other people. And whatever it is that you decide to do, whatever that playbook is, it's just build one. And then, or take someone else's and use it, but then make it your own. Go do the work, and then it starts to evolve until it's something that you own and it's yours.
That's awesome. I'd love to dig into something you mentioned. You mentioned a word which is desperately needed in sales: confidence.
Yes.
Over the course of what you just said, did you always have the confidence going into the sale or going into a career job, whatever it might be, or did that develop over time?
No, I mean, there was early on, I think I had cockiness. I didn't have the confidence. Like I was delusional enough to believe I could do anything and be the hero that saves the day. And then as I ran into situations where my existing skill set wasn't enough, I knew I had to do the work to be able to bring my confidence up. And it's like my first promotion into a sales leadership role. I remember standing up in front of the group who I was just, their peer the day before, and now I'm their boss. And at this time I was pretty young, 25, 26, 27, somewhere in there. And these people were much older than me. And so they were much older than me. And I remember standing up for my first meeting and just bombing so hard in that meeting. Like I was sweating bullets. I couldn't freaking get my thoughts together and like, convey and communicate a good message. And it was being recorded. And then my VP at the time watched it and came back to me and said, I don't know if you can do this. If you do another meeting like this is not going to work out. And so, my confidence was wrecked at that point. I thought I could just show up and wing it and be able to do it. And I realized, like, I'm not losing this role. I busted my ass to get here. And so I'm not going to lose it. And I went and bought a book, like How to Be a Successful Public Speaker by Dale Carnegie, and just read it. And then the main takeaway from there is that you just have to know whatever you're trying to communicate, whatever you're trying to teach or share, you have to know it inside and out and really internalize that message. And you don't have to read a script word for word. But once you do that, then you can just be yourself because it's in you. It's like a good actor, right? Like they don't improv every scene. No, they those improv moments come from the preparation and practice they put into that character to internalize that character so that happens organically and naturally. We think successful people are just naturally gifted with that, but no one is jealous. Everyone's jealous of your success. No one's jealous of the work it took you to get there.
So how did you build, as far as the internal dialogue, embracing what you read from Dale Carnegie, how did you internalize that? And then how did that affect your actions?
So that is where I developed a process. So it's like, okay, anytime I want to communicate something, whether it's in a like meeting with a team or if it's, selling a product, whatever it may be, how I have to do it is I have to write everything down, like top of mind. What do I want to say? If it was an ideal state, what is that script? I go through that top of mind stream of consciousness, write it down. Then I start to organize it into a structure and then I practice it. Now, then when I get onto the call or get into the meeting, it's not about, I don't care about saying it verbatim. It's because I've done the work. I know it inside and out. And now I can really start to focus on what's happening in the moment. And I like to say in the sales process, especially in discoveries, that initial conversation, right? That preparation and practice allows me to internalize it and lets my curiosity lead the conversation. And that's where I want to get to.
So where did you first discover the idea of a sales playbook?
Well, I think it's, whether they have one or not, whether it's a physical document or not, there is a playbook that you're running. And the way to make it effective, to be able to scale anything and make it sustainable, you've got to codify that, right? You've got to have, your team needs to know what good looks like. And it has to be clearly defined and it has to be documented, because now that is our North Star. And we can all, no matter what we do throughout the sales process, we have something to go back to make sure that we're doing it what we believe is the most effective way. And I think coming from an athletic background, it's just something that makes sense, right? And most companies will have some version of a playbook, but it's just digital shelfware. It's just sitting on the shelf collecting dust. No one really goes back to it. And so I'm a big believer in that it should be a living, breathing document. And it's something that you keep going back to and then iterating as things change. But if you're not doing that, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. And there's too much luck involved in that.
What do you mean by there's too much luck involved with?
Well, if you don't have a playbook, then like you're just really dependent on, you don't necessarily know what works and what doesn't. And maybe you're just, the customer's going to buy no matter what, but you have nothing to measure it against. And it's really important to see what's working and what's not, so that you can keep going back and find the things that are working and repeat those. But if you're not documenting that, if you don't understand what good looks like, as you go through that process, so often you're not sure what worked and what didn't. You just know they buy. So you keep doing it. And a lot of times we build bad habits. And so now we're executing something that may have worked a couple times, and now we think it's going to work 100 times, and it just doesn't. And so we want to be able to capture that information so we know how to make decisions going forward and what we need to improve and what's, continuing to be good.
Let's back it up a little bit. Let's say someone watching or listening, okay, so far this is making sense. I like it. The confidence, everything else. Where does a playbook start? as in, I'm an entrepreneur, I don't have one, and I want to have one. What's the starting point of a good playbook?
Right. I think there's 4 pillars to the foundation that to build a solid sales playbook. And first and foremost, let's understand our ICP, our ideal customer or company profile. In B2B sales, ICP, I'm going to let it stand for company. So that's the type of accounts and the businesses that you're going after. And I think it's, how we define ICP is they are your best customers that spend the most money and close the fastest. And the more we can target them, the better chance we are going to have a product market fit, right? And to understand where the demand is and the conversations, how we can help people in our services or our products. From there, let's build out the buyer persona. And so that's understanding the humans that you're talking to, right? B2B sales, for instance, is we're not selling to businesses, we're still selling to humans. So we have to understand that at multiple levels. And if you're selling to larger companies, let's say, that have multiple levels, it's really understanding who is that buyer persona at the user level, at like the director manager level, and then at the executive level, because each of them have different concerns and different initiatives and different outcomes that they're trying to drive. And so going through that exercise of understanding what is this user persona's goals, what are their challenges in their role, what are some of the basic understandings, it allows you to come with a perspective. And that is where you really get those good conversations, because I'm not coming in with open book and just asking them, a list of 20 questions and then, okay, you're qualified, let me give you a pitch, right? I'm coming in with a perspective that allows them to anchor and play off of that, whether that is agreeing with you or whether that is saying, no, this is really how it is, right? So I'm not locked into that perspective that it's right, but showing up with that gives them the ability to engage in a way that they wouldn't if you're just asking, interrogating them, if you will. From there, once you understand, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, once you understand those 2 things, right? The ICP, the buyer persona, now we start to understand who these people are, the companies and the problems that we solve. Now, what is our value proposition? How are we helping these people? And what's our value prop? And now we can, from there, once you get a definition of that value proposition, we can begin to work on our messaging. And that's where the different sales motions start to come into play, right? How are we messaging through outbound? How are we messaging through, direct outreach? How are we messaging through our partner referral channels? How are we doing it through events, conferences? That depends on your business as to the different revenue channels that you have. But those first 4 key elements, the ICP, the buyer persona, the value prop, and the messaging, is what allows you to do all those other things.
So with the ideal client profile, I think this is important. It scares me when I'm at a networking event, or even more so on a one-on-one, and we get into it. Let's just say entrepreneur is a consultant. Oh, who do you sell to? Either the joke, anyone with money, or, well, I can actually I can actually serve anyone. It's like, no, I can't just refer you to anyone. That's everyone in my freaking Rolodex. Could you dig into the ICP a little bit more? Why is it important to have one, and how do you create that?
Yeah, I think that most people are scared to do it because they think it's going to exclude them from making money in other areas, right? If I just focus on this, and what if there's better opportunities with someone else? And so I understand that fear. However, what I know is that when you define that ICP and you target them and you have a clear messaging, those people that are outside that ICP will do the math, and they'll figure out how it connects to them. And you will start to attract those people outside of your ICP. And that's fine to be reactive, but our proactive messaging is towards the people that we're solving the problems. And that can change too, right? As depending on your business and as you grow, there's lots of different elements to that. So you can move up and get bigger companies and bigger sweet spots, but starting somewhere is what allows that. It begins the feedback loop. Right, we can start taking action towards this person. Now I start to understand what works and what doesn't. And it will attract, when you're focused on one, you will attract people from outside that group that you can still help. But we're not going after them because that is a 1 in a million probability. Whereas I'd rather focus on those where I can get 1 in 10, right?
So with the ICP, could you differentiate, delineate, whatever the right word is, the ICP and the buyer persona? Though it seems like those could get a little confused. What's the difference? How do they interact together?
Right, and I think if you are selling to like B2C type that's your sales process, then I think it's those are one and the same, right? Your ICP and your buyer persona are one and the same. Maybe it's the ICP is really focused on the type of company though that you are, and the buyer persona is focused on the people and their roles and what their drives and ambitions are, right? Because that's not always the same as the company. And so, like, for instance, focusing on, if I'm selling to a large corporation and I start with the user, like that's my in, I know to get this deal done, I'm going to have to also include probably a manager is going to have to sign off, and we're going to have to get executive sign off as well. Those are three different people, and they care about three different things. If I go to the executive and say, hey, this is the capabilities of my product and what I can do for you, and the ins and outs and really the weeds and the feature dump with them, they don't care. They care about outcomes and initiatives. But that user persona cares more about those capabilities that affect their day-to-day. And so we just want to be able to capture that so that we can speak to them in a way that resonates and not one that is above their head or below their pay grade, right? And so that is really the differentiation. Is ICP is about the company. If you're selling to businesses, it's about the company. If you're selling, and then the buyer persona is about the humans within that company.
So what you just said, I like that. Let's go with there's multiple levels of decision makers, an executive, a manager, whatever it might be. Do you have the same value proposition for each one of them? Do you have to change it as you go up the ladder? What is the value? First of all, dig into a value proposition a little bit, and then describe, is it the same one at every level, or should you expect to change it at every level?
I think in general, your value prop is what your company can do, right? It explains your product or services and the unique value it brings to that customer. And so that's going to be interpreted differently at each of those levels, right? And so that's, it could be like, hey, our product increases customer engagement and integrates seamlessly with existing IT infrastructure to offer robust, security features. Whatever that value prop is. Okay. If I'm talking to the user, like the value prop's the same, but how I relate to their day-to-day is what matters. How I relate that to the executive is going to be geared around the outcomes that it's driving, the initiatives that it's helping them achieve. And so it's really taking that same statement and just relating it to their role, their persona.
So what is I got involved with the value proposition. You said the fourth part of the playbook. What was that fourth part after value proposition?
Just messaging, right? Building out the messaging and writing that down so that we understand whether we're on a demo call or like a proposal call, or whether we're in a we're just cold calling people. Like just developing that messaging based off those first three is the key, because that's how you're going to go to market, right? We know what we're going to say and how it's going to land, and then I can do it. I can go out and execute it and say, does this work? Does it not? And change it accordingly.
So digging into that a little bit more, what are some components of effective messaging? Because that could be anything across the board.
It could be. I think it's first, like, let's start with how am I going to, let's just say email messaging, right? I'm going to be sending emails. How am I going to communicate with them in an effective way? And that starts with understanding copywriting in general, and really understanding those elements of, like, I'm going to take my value prop. I'm understanding that I'm talking to the VP of sales. And so how can I relate the value prop to him? And that bit builds out my messaging for the personas and the people that I'm talking to. And I'm a believer in, like, if I talk to three different levels of personas, then I'm going to have three different ways that I'm messaging that. Now, the same is true. Like, now, let's say we're in a conversation, we're in a pitch with them. I'm going to message them slightly differently based on who I'm talking to.
So how do you, once you have a playbook, let's just say the initial draft, nothing's ever perfect, but as perfect as it could be.
Right.
How do you know when to change plays in the playbook, how to shift it, when to stick to your guns and when to shift? How do you know when to update a playbook?
Right. The data. I mean, it's if I'm testing new messaging, like, I'm not going to send it out to 10 people and I get no responses and think that messaging is awful. Like, so it's just taking action on enough so we have enough data to get feedback. If I send out 100, that's going to give me more indicative of the success of that. If I send out 1,000, that's even better, right? I can understand what worked and what didn't. And so we want to use that data to be able to then go back and say, hey, this isn't landing. People aren't buying. People aren't setting meetings because of how I'm messaging. So let me go back and tweak it where I can to see what, and I think part of that is like constantly kind of A/B testing that messaging, because there's different copywriting frameworks and methods to do that. And so understanding, like, let me switch the subject line. I have one outbound going with one subject line, another with a different subject line, and see where that lines up.
Well, I think you're hitting at it now. I'd love to dig into, how does a playbook play into prospecting? How does a playbook make it more effective, and does it make it easier? What is prospecting? What is the playbook's role in the ever important prospecting part of the sales process?
What do you need to prospect effectively? And I think the first element of that is, like, I need a list of people to reach out to. And so understanding your ICP and your buyer persona and how you're going to message them is going to create a clear definition of who those people are. And now I can run a search on LinkedIn or, ZoomInfo or Apollo or some tool like that. And now I have a list of these people, and I want to group them based on, as closely as possible to the same group. So if I'm going after the users or a certain persona, like, I'm going to build a list of 100 people or 1,000 people, however big that list is. And that's where I'm going to start focusing on them in that messaging. And then that allows you to not have to, once you do that work and you build that list, now I can, and I know these are the people that I want to contact. I don't have to spend, 30 minutes on each person crafting the perfect message and tailoring it just to them, right? I can start I've developed the message. I can start tailoring it just enough, right? Customizing it so it's not just super generic, but I can spend a few minutes on that, as opposed, and now instead of only being able to get through like 2 or 3 outreaches to these contacts, I can, if I'm doing it 3 minutes each one, there's 20 people I can reach in an hour, right? And so that's where I think most people, when I work with organizations, sales organizations, is that they are spending so much time trying to craft the perfect message to each and every person that's reaching out to, that they don't get to anyone. And so they're like, this just doesn't work for me. And it's like, well, it's going to take longer in the beginning, but once you get down a system, then it works. That's where the kind of the numbers game and B2B sales really plays out, right? Is that, if you have those pieces in place, the messaging, the buyer persona's ideal customer, then, I can go after a lot more people more effectively and more efficiently. And it's not about, we don't need 80% of the people to say yes. We need, a few percentage points to say yes. And then we're doing really well. So I think it starts with a list, and that helps. That list is defined by those 4 elements that we discussed earlier.
You mentioned system. How long should people expect how long does it take to create and then refine a system? And explain system a little more if you need to.
I think it's, what are the steps involved in accomplishing that task? If I want to prospect, what are the steps involved? I need a list, I need the messaging, and then I need to have their email addresses or their phone numbers, so that I can just move down that list and be able to execute. So I think the system is really just whatever those steps you use are involved in that. I think one of the practices I've used on my own is really recording what I'm doing, because especially being a solopreneur, you start to you have a lot of responsibility. You're dealing with all these different elements, and a lot of it's I'm learning for the first time. Working for a company, I always had marketing support, and now that I took it for granted. And now it's like, okay, I'm going to do it. Now I've got to, as I'm going through this and learning this, I'm documenting it so that I can see where those friction points are, those areas that break. And then that starts to get codified, right? And that goes into your playbook document as far as like, these are the different things I do to accomplish this. So now when I know, hey, I need to go generate business, or I need to go do some marketing, I don't have to think about it I don't have to start from zero and reinvent the wheel. I can just go execute. And that's really what it's about. The playbook.
So what's an example, using yourself and your playbook? Can you give an example out of your playbook? What does a scenario look like from beginning to end?
like for instance, one of the areas I've focused a lot on is like social selling, right? And connecting with my ICP through social platforms. And so my system there is that I have, everyone thinks it's about posting content. I believe it's about engagement, right? And that can be comments and likes and DMing people. And so I just developed KPIs. I have a list of, thought leaders in my arena in sales that I respect. And so I have each one of their LinkedIn activity pages, profile pages bookmarked. And so I open up that bookmark. I have 30 plus people. My goal is to comment at least 10 valuable comments each and every day, right? So at least sometimes it's a lot more, but just start there. Because I usually do that early in the morning, right around when people are posting, so that I am sort of one of the first commenters as much as I can be. And so now I go through each one of them. I look at their post. If I can add something to it, I comment. And then after that, I'm going through and looking at, one of the benefits of that is that commenting, that gets my brain thinking about content that I can then create. And so a lot of times I just repurpose my comments and turn those into posts. So that's a way, kind of a two for one, right? But the next step is then to go after the people that I'm not connected to, and I go to my sales navigator list and I start going through them and engaging with their comments. And I usually block off an hour to do that each and every day. And so that way I can connect with about 20 people a day. So, if I find a way to engage, I can send a connection request and then I DM them, right? Just telling them what I'm about. So that's the system that I use for social selling.
What kind of things do you say in the DMs to not sound too salesy?
Yeah. So most of my connections are sent without a connection request, or I'm sorry, without a message. So just a blank connection request. When they connect, I just say, hey, appreciate the connection. Or it's great to be connected here, something along those lines. And then just tell them, I love business. I love sales. If you're ever up for a chat, happy to do it. I just try to start in a conversation. If it is, I may end it with a question like, hey, how's 2025 looking for you? How's the first quarter starting out, right? How successful is January for you? Just something to really light touch. I do not pitch through DMs. Right. I wait for them to ask the question. Hey, what exactly do you do? How do you help people like me? Right. And then I'll go into it, but I never lead with my pitch.
So actually talk a little bit more about that, because I know that can be a tricky terrain to navigate, going from, what's your 2025 look like? Questions like that. At some point you need to bridge a gap between I'm having a conversation and I'm prospecting. How do you bridge that gap again without being too salesy and just smack them over the head or pitch slapping them?
Yeah, so I think it is how's 2025 going? It's going great, or I've had some struggles. Then the follow-ups like, well, what's your goal for 2025? What's preventing you? I start asking like, what's preventing you from accomplishing that, right? What are the biggest obstacles you have to overcome to be able to achieve that goal? And then just asking questions and letting curiosity lead, right? And based on their responses, just finding ways to ask questions. And then at a certain point, if they have to realize there's a pain first, right? That they have tried things that haven't worked and they need outside help. So once they realize that, then that's where I turn, well, this is how I help folks. There's a couple options. You can work one-on-one with me, or you can join my group coaching.
So where do the almighty referral, one of the best ways to get business, you haven't mentioned it yet. I'd love to know, where do referrals play into the playbook?
That's a great question. And it's one I've been talking about a lot lately, because people have been asking, hey, when should I ask for referrals? And my rule of thumb is referrals should happen. You should ask for a referral as soon as you start delivering value. Most people wait till the deal is closed and they're implementing it, or in the thick of it, whatever it may be. And that's too late. And I think that it can be the right time, but like you could ask for referrals as soon as you start delivering value. And like, for instance, if it's an intro call, it's an early call. Like, how do you deliver value in that? right? What I'm doing is trying to qualify them, see if we can work together. And value is not in the solution that you provide. It's in the clarity that you give them during these conversations, right? Because most people have a problem in their head and it's vague and they're stuck in this pattern, this loop of thought, and they're not able to break that loop. So if I can break that loop early on, break that pattern, now I start to provide clarity. They can then take action, right? Action is about making a decision. In my case, I want them to get to the end of our conversation and say, yes, this is something that could work for me, or no, I don't see how this could fit. What I want to avoid are those miserable maybes, right? And so really focused on finding a way, like, who is this person? What are their challenges? Is there a way that I can help? And what do they need to know? What is the relevant information they need to know to believe that what we're trying to accomplish is possible and that they can take action towards this?
I can relate to the miserable maybes. Talk a little bit more about that. How do you define a miserable maybe, and how do you get around it or avoid it?
It's yeah, you know, maybe we can do it later in the year. Call me back in a few months, that type of thing. And that just is, there's the reason why that happens is because they still don't have clarity. And we often drop the ball early on in those conversations is we never define a problem that they really have. We hear buzzwords. We hear, like, I was working with a client yesterday, and he was getting frustrated because some of his deals were stalling and not moving forward. And he was thinking, like, I need to get, you know, executives involved in this process earlier. And he had all these crazy ideas as to how he would do that. And some of them were great, some of them weren't. But I said, well, let's start back at the beginning. Let's go listen to these calls, right? And then we get on the calls, and he's asking some pretty standard questions. The questions were good. They would answer them. And he's like, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the, you know, why do anything right now? Why not just keep doing what you're doing? And they're like, oh, we'd like to modernize our tech stack, and we'd like to increase our agility. And then he just moved on to the next question. What does that mean? What does modernize mean? What does agility mean to this organization, right? So he moved on to the next question. Then he gets to the end, and the next step is a demo call. And he gets them to agree to a demo, because that's really all they wanted to see in the beginning, is just show me what you got. And I'll if it works, it works. You know, if not, I'll tell you. But that doesn't work. Otherwise, sales could just be done through, a video on YouTube, right? We can do a demo. So it's like, okay, let's go back to this. And now what's the problem that you're solving for? Have they clearly defined the problem? Do they understand the impact of that problem? If they don't do anything, what happens? Is that going to impede them from accomplishing these 3 major initiatives that they're trying to accomplish, like grow revenue or increase agility? But again, agility is a fine answer, but we have to understand, how do you measure the success? How do you know you're increasing agility? How do you know you're modernizing? What are the things that make you feel like this is outdated right now? And we want to go broad early, and so that we can understand the context of where the problem we can solve fits in all their other problems. And then once we understand that, we go deeper into the problem that we can solve. Now we can tie it back to how doing this can also help them achieve those other things that they're doing. Because no buyer is just thinking about your solution. They've got a million things. And so we've got to tie all that together so that they can see the value. And if it's not going to help them with this other stuff, maybe it fixes this, maybe it doesn't, they're probably not going to buy. And so that's where we really want to get to the level of understanding of what that problem is and what that impact of that problem is. Now, once we have that is the clarity that they need. They can start taking action. They can understand, is this a real problem that I need to solve now, or is this something that I do need to wait? And so in those intro calls, if this is not something that's that urgent, why am I going to push them down the sales process and try to work with them when that's not going to be a good start, right? Because they've got other priorities that they're dealing with. And we can only deal with like really a couple priorities at once if you're trying to accomplish things. So people have to be focused. And the more we spread that out and take them away from that, the less likely we're helping them and the less likely we'll get a sale.
And tell me if I'm on point here. I think I am, but I just want to check. It sounds like what you're saying at the end of the day, as far as clarity goes, sales is about problem solving. It's not about the pitch and overcoming objections and everything else. I mean, am I on point by saying that at the end of the day, sales is about problem solving? If you solve a problem, they'll give you money to make it go away.
Yes. 100%. I think this is where most people, when I say sales guy, most people get that ick or cringe because their first image that pops in their head is that used car salesman or, Wolf of Wall Street or a late night infomercial pitch man. Right. And, that has its usefulness, but that's not what sales really is. It really is about a guide, and it's really about solving those problems. And I think there's two ways to approach that. When you have a lead coming to you and that's inbound, usually they have a decent understanding of what their problem is. They have a clearer definition of that problem than if you're going outbound. And so, because if you're going outbound, you're kind of interrupting they're not thinking about it and how you can solve it. Maybe you find that, but only 3% of your target addressable market is in position where they know they have a problem, they're ready to evaluate, and they're ready to do something. It's just a matter of like finding the right solution. Now, that's great. If you're Apple or Coca-Cola or some major brand, you can capitalize on that 3%, right? But for us and most people, it's that next 40% that feels that something's just not right, and they could be convinced to take action, right? And so in that situation, those outbound, we're not just solving the problem. Before we can solve the problem, we have to surface the problem. And that's really the skill, whether they know what it is or not. If they come to us and they know the defined problem, then we have to pressure test that. Is it really a problem? Is this just a story that they're telling themselves, right? And then that next 40% is really about understanding how do we surface the problem, right? And that's understanding what they're trying to accomplish at a high level and broad, and then start to dig down.
We have covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. When it comes to creating a playbook to get to your next big idea, to sell your next big idea, with everything we spoke about, whether it's something you want to reiterate that we already did speak about, or something you haven't touched on yet, when it comes to a playbook, if you were to say, you know what, if you're going to do this, and people will listen and watch, like, I get it, this is cool. If you were to say, above all else, at least do this one thing, at least do this, what would you tell people to do?
Start. That's the first thing. Just start by writing it down. I think that's where most people, they just take action, and then they don't have any documentation that they can measure their action against. So they just keep doing the same thing. So I think the first thing is just start. Identify the elements. Again, to me, it really starts with those first 4 pillars: the ICP, the buyer persona, the value prop, and the messaging. From there, the other stuff, how you go about doing that, the different channels you use are influenced by that. So I think just define what good looks like, document that, and then you continue to prepare, practice, execute, review. And so building that cycle, but it really just starts with taking action. I think most people just overthink it. They don't write it down, they plan, and then they never execute. And then they go back to the planning and the preparing stage, and then they don't execute more. And then they go back to the planning and preparing stage. And so we just got to start and break that loop and get to the end where we execute, then review. And then now we can go back and say, prepare, or how we planned worked or didn't work.
This has been excellent. If people want to find you online, what's the best place or places to go?
ShaneJamison.com is my website where you can book some time with me for free, and we can discuss about your challenges. And if it makes sense to work together, great. You'll understand a little bit about my approach. You'll find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/n/Shane Jamison. And then also our sales community, which is geared towards B2B sales professionals that are, historically in the last couple of years struggling. 84% of B2B sales professionals missed quota last year, according to Salesforce State of Sales report. And when you start looking as to why, they are wanting feedback, they are wanting coaching, they are wanting guidance, and it's just not there. Someone has in their company, there's a playbook, there is things that they should do, but they're not the feedback loop is broken. So we want to empower sales professionals, take control, build their playbook that they can then use, whether at this current job or the next, to further their career. And that is called Sales Redemption. That is called salesredemption.com.
Salesredemption.com. Got it. This has been awesome. Thank you so much, Shane. I appreciate your time.
Mark, it's a pleasure. Great talking to you.
And scene. Thank you for tuning into the Idea Climbing radio show today. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something great out of it that you can take into your own life and use to be better in your own life. If you want more great shows like this, go to 216thenet.com. You want to see more of my interviews, radio show, and podcast? Go to markjcartertv.com. Again, that's markjcartertv.com and 216thenet.com. Hope to see you on one of those platforms or maybe even both.